All right, welcome to another episode of the High Performance Podcast. I'm here as always with my trusty co-host, who's coming in from Thailand. Shout out to Jacob.
Always working on the road.
Yeah. I was happy to be able to get him on for this one last minute. And our special guest for today is Jack Crago, or you might know him from Instagram, where he's known as Jog on Crago. So welcome to the show, mate.
Thanks for having me.
And obviously we're on a GPP sort of hybrid kick, but I thought it was about time we got someone who was a little bit more pure running based. Actually, I saw you lift some weights for the 100%. First time about a month ago. I'm like, oh, right, because I wasn't sure if you were like a running purist or you did do a little bit of S&C on the side or a little bit of lifting weights. And we'll get into that. But yeah, can you sort of introduce yourself? Again, I'm sure a lot of our audience and sort of listeners probably already following you because you're one of the more legit Aussie running influencers on the scene. But I also know that I've listened to you before on a couple of podcasts, and I know you've got a great story about how you got into running. So take us through a bit of the sporting background, how you got into running, and then also how you got into, we'll call it ethical runfluencing.
Yeah, I think that's a good label for it. So I'm based over on the West Coast, Western Australia. I live up on a farm, probably 2 hours north of Perth, hour and a half inland, so pretty dry, just out there on a cattle farm. Probably played footy for most of high school, primary school, probably up until about year 10. And then had a brain bleed just out of nowhere, just like going for a run in the morning, doing a bit of like general fitness stuff for footy, like kind of pre-season and like part of all the, like the talent programs that run through the summer. So you play for your local club during the winter. And then the off season was pretty much another footy season. So I was doing that for probably 2 years, driving 2.5 hours back and forth, training, playing games on the weekend, that kind of stuff.
How many hours out of Perth were you? Just to give me an idea of how rural you were.
Probably 2 hours, 20 minutes, probably 2.5 by the time we actually got down to the actual training ground. Racking up a fair few miles over a couple months, really. I was always a pretty big fan of running. Like we did a few, like the kind of off-season fitness sessions. We had like a German pro runner come to Mora, town of about 2,000 people. He ran us through some just pretty basic sessions, like 400-meter repeats, 200-meter repeats, just doing a bit of mileage here and there, probably running about 20 or 30 Ks a week, just enough to kind of dip the toes in.
Were you dominating school cross country?
The thing is, I've been about 180 centimeters, probably 70 kilos since about year 7. So I was dominating most stuff just because I was so much bigger than everybody else. Classic man child, chuck me in the ruck, literally just
what
don't even
jump. What month is your birthday?
September. So I wasn't even the oldest,
so it's none of that bullshit. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just, for some reason, just grew, and then I stopped, to be fair. So probably gained about a centimeter since then. Kind of had a bit of experience with running there. Was probably enjoying running more and more as the years kind of went on. Enjoying football less, I guess. Probably a bit of burnout. Like you're playing a sport for a whole year and driving, training, kind of got a bit much, I'd say. And then had the opportunity, disaster, either one. Brain bleed on the kitchen floor. Doctor said, had a fractured skull earlier when I was about 7 or 8. So he said, you've had some brain injuries, probably not a good idea to go messing around with that. So into year 10, going down to boarding school, joined into cross country, pretty decent base of fitness, and then just kind of locked in from there. I think within the first 4 weeks of being a cross country runner or a runner, I was doing 130 Ks a week. Very quickly escalated, and then it's crazy.
I want to just probe into that a little bit, and also just for our international listeners as well. I mean, the Australian youth sports are so much more aerobic based, but in particular, like Aussie rules football, I would say is like you're running the most mileage in that at the highest intensity, like compared to any other code in Australia.
Yeah, like you'll rack up. The pros will get like 20 Ks of mileage. I reckon like a average resi, like if you're doing a bit of running, you're on the wing or something, you'll rack up 10, 12 Ks of high intensity running for the match. So you definitely get a good base off that kind of stuff. So coming in like 5K off the bat, maybe like 18:30, which is like
amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty decent.
Pretty
Something you'd say that's yeah.
Do you think that you have are you a heaps competitive person?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
because that's
I wouldn't say like
something my brother would do. Like he's the much more much more successful sports person in my family, and like I had to quit his sport because he was like, yeah, I'm not going to make it as a pro sort of thing. Or like surf life saving was dying, but just the way I watch him approach every other sport that he goes into, like there is just like a certain intensity to it. So
bit of an all or nothing.
were you compensating for like the lack of AFL? You're like, I need to fill a giant hole here, and 130 clicks is the only thing that's going to do it, or were you just sort of you got caught up in a moment? Were you trying to set a world record?
Yeah, just started enjoying it, I guess. And I guess I've got a kind of all or nothing attitude, you know, like if you're going to do something, do it properly. And yeah, did start enjoying it as well. And also, I guess it also come off 6 weeks. 6 weeks of probably the most inactive I've ever been. Like, you know, like a week in a hospital bed. You wait, you know, you're stiff walking around to go to the loo. And then finally being allowed to move again. I think I just got hard carried away. The fact that I didn't get injured is honestly like, it's suspicious. I don't actually know how I got away without a stress fracture or something like that. I would have been, 16?
Damn.
And you weren't partying. Like I imagine like there's not a lot of fucking nightclubs and like shit like where you are. So in turn, mate, I think it's just like it was perfect storm. It's like if there was going to be a time in your life to tank that much mileage just on the back end of puberty while a few things are going your way. Or just a bit of luck, I guess.
Yeah, you got to take that. And then, so that was probably, it's coming on 5 years ago now. So slowly progressed through there, stuck with cross country for my winter sport for boarding school, did some halves, probably did my first marathon before I turned 17, I think like the day before I turned 17. And then, just kind of progressed from there to the point where we started really enjoyed it. Obviously, probably got a bit more into like the shoes, the gear, you know, like all the nutrition, all that kind of like, all the kind of gimmicks and gadgets. And that kind of got to the point where wanted to start a social media page about it 2 years ago. And that's kind of progressed to the point where we are today, I guess.
What was your training sort of protocols at the start? Was it very structured, or you just go out and smash a 10K easy run and then just go hard? Or
it was just bulk miles. It was just like head out. I want to do 15, 16 Ks. Sometimes it'd be double runs. It wasn't. I think the one thing that was probably sitting in my favor was that I did have an understanding of the fact that, you know, like intensity, like is a big component of how much load you have for the training week. So even though I was racking up 130 Ks, I probably only had about 15, 16 Ks of quality, you know, high intensity effort. Wow. The rest was just crazy, you know? So that probably saved me. If I had an extra 10, 15 Ks of high volume in the legs, might have been a completely different story.
Yeah, interesting.
Can you rattle off some of your PBs, please?
Yeah. So at the moment,
we love that stuff.
I love it as well. Just absolutely licking the chops with this. So at the moment, 5K is sitting at 15:53 done on the track. 10K is sitting at 34.
That's a big one in the hybrid space. Like anything sub 20-minute 5K is sort of viewed as legit. I feel like
it's like the
if
standard,
you want to be Instagram and Instagram standard, let's say.
I love
5 minutes under that. Fuck.
Yeah, and like it's almost bizarre hearing that like from you guys, because I guess I'm kind of involved in the more like serious running community. So I'm like on the back end, you know, like 15:53.
I know the marathon world record, and I know like hybrid IG times.
Yeah, exactly. So like there's that kind of disconnect, I guess, between like the, you know, like the recreational and then the kind of semi-hardcore, then going to the pro. Like if you said the fact that, you know, pros are regularly going sub 13, like that's just incomprehensible. Like it's just miles away.
It's like another world.
You're still closer to them than you are the sub 20-minute 5K people. I know taking 2 minutes off is like the thought of it is crazy to you, but it's it's getting up there. Anyway, let's go a bit longer.
Yeah, so 30. Probably sitting at about 34 for the 10K. Bit of time left there. 1:14.50 odd for the half. And then my Mara's probably the one that I'm most proud of, which is 2:43. 2:43
Wow.
mid.
Damn.
And so
good headroom under that
towards-
sub 3.
Sub three, yeah.
I went sub 3 on the first marathon attempt. Went 2:56. So it was kind of bizarre because everyone was coming over congratulating me, like, giving me a high five. Well done, young man. Like you've just achieved this sub 3. And I was like, oh, like this has just kind of come along. I didn't even know sub 3 was a thing. So yeah, progressed from there to 2:43, and then we'll be aiming to go sub 2:40 at Osaka in 2 weeks.
If you want to learn more about the general physical preparation training philosophy, we put together an extremely practical course covering all the different aspects of physical preparation, as well as a unit on programming, so you know how to tie it all together and produce the same world-class results that we get with our athletes. We've got pre-recorded lectures, a community page where you can ask questions and interact with the other GPP coaches, as well as monthly calls where you can ask questions live or just catch up and hang out with us. Check out the link in the show notes for more info. Anyway, back to the show. That's sick. What's that? Whatever. We'll get into it. I want to know your 800 meter time.
Oh, yeah, so
You did
800
one
I've
in your off
cracked.
season, didn't you?
I cracked 1:57. So that would be my
Pretty
most.
quick.
So you get like the World Athletics ranking, like which is the way that they give you points based on pretty much how good your time is. And so like I've been putting 4 or 5 years into doing long distances. The marathon I've been devoting months and months to training towards. And I go and do an off-season 800 rep, and it comes through, like, in terms of points equivalents, like I'd say my other times are maybe, let's say, 500, and, like, the pros are getting up, like, 1,200, 1,300, and then my 800 meters is, like, 800. So it's, like, 300 points better than my other distance time. So
You could probably smack a sub 54, I reckon. Sorry,
yeah,
just quickly.
that's what I'm hoping to do. And I would have done that as well if I hadn't got
That's
the offer
legit.
to go to Osaka. So, yeah, I would have been training towards that properly during the summer, which is when it actually makes sense to. So, yeah, I would say I'm probably most, like, physiologically suited to running an 800. Bit more muscle mass, I suppose. Probably a good blend of, fast twitch, slow twitch. Yeah, just a bit more mass, I think, definitely helps in the 800.
Have you been paying much attention to that scene? Like, there's a lot of really interesting characters in the middle distance at the moment, or is it sort of like you're just focused on yourself? Sorry, I know you pay attention to running scenes. Yeah, are you paying attention to the middle distance drama?
I know exactly. Yeah, I know what you mean. I'd say I'm probably more tuned into the longer distance marathon scene. Honestly, not really tapped in too much to the.
I
like
want
the 800,
you to get into
1500.
it.
Yeah, I do as well. Like I guess I've kind of been like postponing it in my mind because I know that I've still got a couple of months before I can really nail down and think about it. But yeah, there's like, it's kind of this weird, the 800 and I guess the 1500, but more the 800 is just like it's a weird event because you get some people who come in, from the sprinting background, other people coming in from 3K 1500. And there's just this weird dynamic where some people are doing it, based off their sprinting prowess. Others are doing it off a big tank. And, there's no real way to know who's going to be better at that.
Have you done a mile before, or?
I've done a few 1500s. My 1500 is probably unders at the moment, sitting at about 407. So, yeah, I think maybe a couple months, I reckon I could probably happily say like maybe 403, and I wouldn't get crucified for being so far off that.
Yeah, well.
Maybe it is a good time to get into the Osaka thing. So when you said you got the offer for Osaka, is that because, like, from my understanding, it's very competitive to get into a lot of marathons and things like that, and there's like ballots and things like that, or it's almost like getting concert tickets. Was it from that sort of situation, or are you running the sort of times now where it's like, do they actively try to get as many fast people as possible in there and like, or?
Yeah, well, not the fast route by any means, because the depth at those marathons is going to be insane. Like there'll be hundreds of people finishing ahead of me. This one was actually the first time that I've had like a real kind of dealing with a brand. So this case, it was Mizuno.
Cloud-based, hell yeah.
Cloud-based, which we love. We love to see that. So based on like, shoe reviews, social media presence, they reached out. They said that they'd sent over my profile to some of the some of the bigwigs over in Japan. They said they like what they saw. And so, yeah, like a 5-day trip to Osaka, obviously like using their shoes, their gear. Probably
check out the Mizuno factory.
Yeah, check out the factory, check out the design labs, their flagship store. It's just going to be unreal.
Fuck, that's so good. And so Osaka, what's the climate like? Is it like a favorable, what do you want to run a fast time?
Me personally, I want obviously flat, but I want cold and dry. And from my understanding, it's going to be that. Like last year, people got hypothermia from it. Like it was cold and rainy and wet then, but like most of the time, I think the consensus is that it's going to be like you're somewhere around like 6 to 12 degrees, fairly dry. Hopefully in a big city like that, it shouldn't be too windy. So pretty cold.
But once you go, and I imagine it's great, but you just got to get going.
So, and like I'm someone who runs quite hot. Like I would say, like in the kind of pack, I'm probably someone who sweats and overheats quite quickly. So anything over 20 degrees for me, I'm pretty much out of the race very early on. So I'm hoping that 6 to 12 degrees, you know, after 3 or 4 Ks, warm up, and then I should be cool, you know, cruising perfectly. Yeah.
Does weather play a huge factor? I know a lot of people rave on about the weather and sort of cope as well, but when they don't have a great time. But does it play a huge factor, or is it all subjective compared to whoever is the race?
I would say it depends on the race distance. Like obviously wind is going to ruin most events, like hard wind, you know, you're literally just losing output. But I would say for the longer events, the weather especially, like when you're moving for a long time, you're having to regulate your body temperature over those longer distances. You're taking in fuel as well to compensate for that. Over the half and full marathon, I would say heat can be devastating. Like here in Perth, for some reason, because in Australia, they have all of the scheduling for the city marathons, Perth often gets pushed back. So we're kind of running early October, and it'll be, you know, some years it might be 20 degrees, that's fine, but it might push up towards 26, 27 degrees. And you'll notice the times across the board have just plummeted. And there'll be like, you know, people waiting around for ambulances after overcooked, dehydrated.
Wow.
So yeah, and like even that we have like the Fremantle Running Festival, which goes into late November. And yeah, like so many people catching an ambulance home or catching an ambulance trip because they've just absolutely blown up. But yeah, in the 800 or 1500, when you're not having to regulate your body temperature as much, I would say plays a little bit less of a factor.
Do event organizers are they in touch with all this stuff, or do they just put it in whenever it fits them and the timing and the funding of it all?
I think a bit of both. I think they definitely, like, if you're setting up a marathon in January, you know that there's going to be people who don't come because it's too hot. But I think there's also a part of it which is like there's only certain times of the year that they can book out streets and close off roads and stuff in order to take on those races. And there's like, even here in WA, when we don't have a whole lot going on, most weeks of the year are going to have some event on, which you just can't really afford to be competing with. So yeah, a bit of both. They do know that running in the heat sucks, but it is also Australia. So there's probably only like 2 months of the year where it's absolutely perfect for, you know, record PB shape.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I was going to say, can you give us, like, is there any marathon you have at the top of your list as far as a destination marathon other than Japan? And also, is there one where you're sort of looking at as like, that's one to set my fastest time? Again, obviously Japan is not a bad option. Is there a better one? Or is there just like a world renowned where people are like, this is the fastest track? Like,
yeah, I'd say for the marathon, like Japan has become very popular, especially here in WA, because it's actually cheaper to travel to Japan and stay in accommodation, feed yourself, and then go to the race than it is to go over to Melbourne or Sydney and compete with, you know, so many people over there. It's actually cheaper. So that's become really popular. People going over to like Fukuoka, Tokyo, Osaka, heaps, like just even like more like rural events. People are going over to things that you wouldn't even hear about. So Japan has become more popular, especially like pretty good weather during the summer. I would say the general consensus in the kind of like world marathon majors, Berlin is extremely fast. That's where It's where a lot of world records for the marathon have been set. The current one's at Chicago, but Berlin is where a lot of people they've got to their peak. They're like 32 years old. They think they're at their peak fitness. They go to Berlin. That's probably, the holy grail. The other one is Valencia in Spain, which is actually an interesting one because it's not as cold or, like the weather doesn't seem to be as perfect for it, but something about it, I don't know whether it's some
humidity. Do you want no humidity?
Yeah.
Like makes the air
something
easier
like that. I have no idea, but for some reason, Valencia just seems to be a fast race. People always do well there, or most of the time, unless there's like a heat wave or something. So those two, I would say, it'd be between those if I was going to choose a destination race. If I reached my peak.
Nice. Have you done an ultra, or is it more you just pay attention to it because there's so much drama, and obviously that's where a lot of the runfluencing scene is at, and you're sort of somewhat tied to that?
Yeah, I've done an ultra. There was a race down in Bustleton, which is probably 2 hours south of Perth, along the coast. It's where everybody in Western Australia. Yeah, or the jetty. Yeah, all the Ironmans and everything goes on down there. It's where most people are during the summer. I did an ultra race along there. It was called the Sandman 50, and they ran from the Bustleton jetty to a town, Dunsborough, another jetty, 25 k's away. So you ran up and back along the sand at full moon, low tide. So you're running along like concrete hard sand on a little bit of a slope. You're jumping over a few like inlets and outlets, which was pretty cool. So I did that 50 k's. It's probably the most, like, it probably sounds gnarly, but it was actually probably one of the easiest ways to, get your 50k debut flat, fairly fast. The weather was good. So yeah, that was my ultra. I don't think I've done. That's my only 50k. But I do have a bit of an interest in it. Like, I would say for now, like the 800 and 1500 is probably going to be my best bet at doing, like maximizing performance. And then after that, on the trails is probably my next best bet in terms of like leg strength and, like just holding on, pushing up the hills and that kind of stuff. So bit of an interest in the ultra scene. It's a bit of there's a lot of weird units.
It's a shit show at the moment, isn't it? Fucking Lambros Army. I mean, they seem to be the most annoying cunts in the scene. Like, what the fuck is... I mean, I don't fault them for blowing up because they just posted the content. It's on society for blowing it up. And yeah, I think that's what gets me down about it. No hate to them, but yeah, they're fucking...
Yeah.
Sorry, the actual question in there, I just wanted to take a shot at them. But there's a spectrum, I think, of ultra runfluencers at the moment, all the way from, you're not an ultra runfluencer, but I put you towards like the awesome ethical end of the spectrum, always putting out good shit. But then you've got all these people who maybe just like slightly more towards the pure influencer side all the way. And then you got like the mental toughness guys like your Gogginses and stuff like, I mean, he's way better than Lambros and stuff like that. And even, so Ned Brockman is someone who, his journey across this Australia, it got me going. The content was fucking phenomenal. And it was tremendous vibes, raising money for the homeless. But then, like, I think something that was really interesting, I mean, I know he already got hate for that from like the hardcore ultra community. I completely understand that. It's like in any community when someone sort of blows up ahead of their time or for whatever reason or for being sub-elite, people sort of get jaded about that. But then it cranked up a little bit more. I noticed it a lot in the, what did he do recently? 1,000 miles?
It was 1,200 meters around, not 1,200 meters, 12,000 kilometers around the track. Or was it 1,000?
It's 7 days or some shit like that, or maybe 10 days. And a lot of people are like, you shouldn't be promoting that you have a shot at this record. Like that was pissing a lot of people off. What I wanted to know, sorry, I'm not trying to shit on Ned Brockman. I still sort of like the bloke, but I understand sort of if I was a hardcore runner, why I might get a bit fucking jaded about it. Who are the best ultra runners? They obviously like the type of personalities, I imagine, like super neurodivergent, hate social media.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Completely. So like, that's like, there's this kind of gaping hole in the ultra community where all of their idols are, like they're recluses.
They don't have reception.
In the mountains. They don't have time to be posting, TikToks about what nutrition they're using. So there's like, people like Jim Walmsley, Courtney Dauwalter, she's on social media a bit more, but like...
She was the Moab winner, right? The first Moab winner, was it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. She runs in the like the basketball shorts. That's probably that's like her I'm not shtick, but like, that's how she's
Yeah,
identified, I guess. And there's like, there's like ultra runners like Zach Miller who like live up in the mountains or just like drive a bus around all year round, just training, running trails, fastest known times, all that kind of stuff. There is just like a big hole of ultra running content, which someone's going to feel eventually. And I think that's kind of like the story of the running community, is that like, we're very friendly. We're accepting if you want to run. But when it comes to content, I don't know whether it's an Australian thing as well. People are just too scared to stick their neck out and actually say something. So like, you've got all of these coaches, like, 50-year-olds who've had 2 decades of experience. They know everything about what there is to know about running, but they are either too scared or they're too, I don't know, in their own bubble to want to post content. And so you get people who, there is a need for quality content. Whether they can produce it or not is, up in the air. But there is a need for content to help beginners out.
Because like
I think there is an element.
Pre-social media, it was like lifting advice was gatekeeping. People would be like, go fuck yourself. Like, if you want to know something.
Yeah. I would say there's absolutely an element of that. Like there's a few like more like obviously the really good runners, people who, get paid to coach. They're not just going to hop on social media and share all their secrets, all of their great advice. But there's probably a tier below.
Secrets that are like actually game changing though? Like, or is it just?
I think it's more. Yeah, it's a lot of 1%ers, but it's also like specific advice personalized to you as a runner.
Yeah.
And obviously, I think a lot of it is the fact that you just can't communicate that on social media. Like you can't produce a piece of content which can suit everybody. And so oftentimes it just gets left out rather than finding a way to give, generalized points which people can, put together themselves and actually think critically because, they are adults and they can think for themselves. People are too scared to, say like, you should be doing this kind of generalized concept during your training week. People are too scared to do that. So, yeah, it's weird. I think it's a combination of gatekeeping. I think it's also just part of running as well. It's so specific and individual and complex. Everyone's starting from different points, different fitness levels, training towards different races. There's just such a big spectrum. It's like, where do you even begin? And so, then there's people who, like these influencers who don't understand that, who are happy to just say, you know what? I'm going to make a 5K program and I'm going to chuck it up there for $20 and people will probably buy it. So there's a hole there, but what do we fill it with? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I'd say with lifting, a lot of people, posting content, people can get a lot from just general advice from their experiences training and stuff like that. So you'd say running, there's definitely a period where like people will benefit from personal advice much more. Like it will make a much significant difference. And the question really is like, what is that advice? Is it more around pacing? Is it more around nutrition? What would you say?
I would say that it's probably like the time for really specific advice is when things are starting to ramp up, like especially when you're like moving to a different stage of your training. Like I would say on the whole, like humble opinion, I'd reckon there'd be people who disagree, but if you're just starting out as a beginner and you're doing 1 or 2 runs a week, you probably don't need to be too concerned about, your magnesium intake or, the very specific, or it's good to be doing strength training, but you don't need to be worrying about complex movements and all this other stuff and your shoe rotation and what nutrition you're taking in for your 5K run down the coast. You probably don't need to worry about that.
Shoe rotation is crazy.
Yeah. I would say people, like if you suddenly decide, okay, I'm going to be training towards the Sydney Marathon at the end of this year, I'm going to start ramping up my training. That's probably where you need that specific advice on like, how do I increase my mileage sustainably? How do I fuel my body as we're taking on, increased energy expenditure? Like there's a lot of things that are going to change. And I think that's where it definitely helps to have specific advice from someone who's experienced. I would say that would be the main spot.
And I think just like there's an innate value in just like coaching, like the role of a coach, just generally speaking, absolutely. Like to take your own fucking head noise out of it. And just getting that third person perspective. I was going to ask about, what's doing when you're just getting into running? It sort of is just like super basic, like do some easy runs and some hard runs. Beyond that, what are we sort of looking at? I listened to you on another podcast. I think it was, what's the trail podcast?
Yeah, Trail Kings.
Trail Kings. Yeah, funny guys. But I actually, it might have even been them that brought it up. But I thought it was an interesting talking point. This idea that as far as being a trainable quality, bringing up your VO2 max, it'll hit a ceiling quite quickly from training versus your lactate threshold. It seems to have a higher training ceiling. Is that something there's any truth in? And then what does that look like in terms of like how do you implement that in your programming, focusing on your lactate threshold? Oh, sorry, what's doing? I don't even know if that's the way you would talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from memory, their podcast, they were chatting about, I don't know who they had on, but they knew what they were talking about. I'll try to replicate that. So there's three things. That
it was a guess.
Part of your performance is going to be your VO2 max, your lactate threshold, and your efficiency or your running economy, how much energy you spend to run a certain pace. And so, your VO2 max can reach the ceiling pretty quickly. And most of the time, I don't even know the real numbers, but a lot of the time, the fastest runner doesn't necessarily have the best VO2. It's more
is this just
a kind
like
of expression
monstering
of how
zone 2? Is that what we're talking?
Yeah. Yeah. So you can get some good, I guess there'd be a fair bit of gains that can be had, especially initially. Like, most people coming out of high school haven't run since primary school, not doing sport anymore. There's probably a big gain that can be had from increasing your VO2 max. But after that, a lot of it is going to come from manipulating your economy, how efficient you can get. I don't think there's a heap of efficiency that can really be gained unless you're like stomping all over the joint and you look like, you're actually super uncoordinated. And then your lactic threshold is how well you can clear lactate from the muscle or be able to tolerate high levels of lactate when running in an anaerobic condition. So that for me, in my training, just means a lot of extended efforts just below the point where you start to feel shit.
And is that the justification for doing like any sort of interval training would be to be able to like prod that a little bit more aggressively multiple times in the same session, working on set clearance? Obviously, but then you can still do lactate sessions where it is just a continuous run at a higher intensity. So I guess are they the two main methods of lactate threshold training? Or maybe also the purpose of intervals could be to work on the technical aspects of running faster.
Absolutely. I guess the key thing with the lactate threshold training is the fact that because you are staying below it or kind of just dipping into it slightly, you can accumulate more load over the session rather than, if you do 8 200-meter repeats all out, by the end of the session, you're absolutely saturated with lactate. You are sore, a lot more muscle damage. And so you might not be able to pull up as quickly for the next session or, the quality of your next run might be decreased. So lactate or threshold has kind of been introduced as a way to increase the amount of load that you can put into your training week or effective time spent building fitness without increasing your injury risk or blowing up or, feeling crap through all of your sessions. Still definitely a place for the higher intensity stuff, like especially for like my 5K fitness, we'll do a fair bit of faster stuff where I'm just absolutely loading up. But I would say on the whole, especially since I started coaching probably, 15 months or even 16 months ago, that's been probably one of the biggest inclusions is just steady state, 10 by 1K. You finish feeling pretty tired, pretty sore, but not in the way where you're like, I can't walk the next day.
Is it like a zone 3 bordering above a bit of a zone 2? Because I know that the common trend right now is just keep everything polarized, keep your easy runs easy, hard runs hard. Is it just
I would say, it's kind of, I think it's right up the top of zone 3 just before 4. And then, they set like the polarization with the zone 2. The one thing I would say is that pretty important note is that the zone 2 is probably only really effective if you are doing a good deal of intensity in your week as well. Like that's kind of meant for the high mileage gurus, the people who are running 160 Ks per week. They're doing a heap of mileage on their Tuesdays, their Thursdays. They're doing a good deal of intensity on the Sunday long run. They probably need the zone 2 in order to still get a bit of aerobic stimulus without cooking their legs. But, like the average punter who's just rolling around for 2 runs a week, they could probably just benefit from pushing it a little bit faster, get up into zone 3, because at the end of the day, that's still going to be a better stimulus than zone 2.
80% of our audience wouldn't be able to run in zone 2. They'd have to be off feet.
That is true also.
But yeah, because this is something that we sort of talk about in our education. Like, such a good goal for Gen Pop clients is to get them one of the benchmarks we say, like, get your clients the ability to run in zone 2 for like, what did we set the benchmark at? Was it 20 minutes?
No, we said you have to do a 5K in 25 minutes with a zone 2. Was it? I think in 25.
We did come up with some sort of benchmark, but yeah, it's like, I just think you're a bit of a slug if you can't run in zone 2 or whatever. There's no judgment to the slugs out there, but go out and pound some pavement. And if you're super heavy, I get it. Oh, I don't. What are your thoughts on how much do you weigh?
I weigh, at the moment, I probably weigh about 75, and that's like end of marathon training. So like, and then probably when I get a bit fat over Christmas, I might be like, approaching 80.
Okay. How much slack do we give heavy runners, or do you just want to go no comment? Like, do you have any thoughts on that? The GPP group program is the best deal in strength and conditioning. For less than $1 a day, you get access to my programming, as well as access to me through a group chat where you can reach out, ask questions, or have a form check. You can even get a week for free before you commit to it. Check out the show notes for more info. I threw out Nick Bear. He's probably not the best example. Even Fergus Crawley I think he's rocking about 90 kilos of mass sort of thing. Can you give us a percentage of like what sort of, how much slack is it? Or is it just, they just suck at running? Because I feel like there's this idea that you can't be a good runner if you're heavy. They get a lot of excuses.
Yeah, I think like you can definitely, like Nick Bears runs sub 240, which is what I'm chasing now. So you can still be a good run. Yeah, so he's rapid. So like, so you can definitely still perform, but it's just like, the amount of work that it takes, I just reckon it would be so much easier to just shed 2 or 3 kilos of fat and, even muscle just
he
to
could be
chase,
a 220 guy if he was small.
Yeah. Maybe I reckon I would give him 225, 230 if he dropped a fair few kilos. Like, it definitely does play a part. And there's obviously like arguments about like useful muscle mass, which one is contributing. Having gigantic traps sitting on top of your shoulders, it's probably not really going to be helping your running economy. So, like there's useful muscle mass, and there's going to be people who can still run faster with a good deal of muscle hanging off them. But in general, if you really want to run fast, then skinny is probably, that's just that's just physics.
Until you get hit by a car like Nick Bear, I think that's when the muscle mass paid off. He tanked a car crash while he was on a morning run.
Or you're on the start line of a race with 3 million runners. So, yeah.
Have you ever had any crazy shit like that? You're not a road cyclist. It wouldn't happen where you're doing your runs, having to deal with like cars or anything. I've like few near misses with the cars, but I've turned around on a cycle path just in my own zone, and I got hit by a cyclist. I reckon they were flying at about 30 k's an hour, just cleaned me up. But both of us stayed on our feet. I don't know how that works, but like they just like.
Oh, okay.
That's solid.
So that was probably the worst I've copped, but yeah.
Damn, I got launched. I got hit by a bike in the city, and I reckon I got launched 2 meters. You're obviously way more of a specimen than me. And your guy sounds like he was an elite cyclist. My guy was an Uber deliverer. Maybe it was the mass. It was a heavy order.
Wasn't one of those big fat tire mountain bikes. That would floor you.
No, it was pretty thin because I remember the tire bent and I was just like, yeah, good. Oh, he felt so bad. And I just wanted him to fuck off. Like I was on my way to work. I was late for a session. And I was like, just fuck off, please. He ran a red. I should have been looking, but I was late for a session.
I feel like a lot of the running content, at least in our space, I feel like there's a bit of separation between your space and our space when it comes to running content. It's been a lot around easy runs, get into easy runs. You're not doing enough. But there's obviously value in those harder runs. Where do you think beginners could find value in just ramping up the intensity a bit? Because I feel like, especially for running, people just want to quit when it comes to getting a bit harder.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a trade-off. Like, obviously easy running is good because it's low risk exercise, like you're not going to be loading up your tendons and joints before they're ready for anything. So I think in the early stages of running is perfectly valid for, people to take things as easy as they need to settle in and actually allow their body to adapt. But I do think eventually, like, there's going to come a point where you need to run fast if you want to, I guess different things for different people. Some people could break 20 minutes in the 5K just off, 30 Ks of easy volume in their week. Other people, there will come a point eventually where you do just need to do a couple of 1K repeats to get the leg speed and actually experience what it's like to run fast. So I would say, especially if you, this is more a theory than anything else, but I think, like, especially if you haven't run fast for a long time, like most people haven't run since high school, haven't done social sport, most people haven't sprinted in the last 10 years of their life. Like, if you're not actually just used to moving fast and you want to run a PB, there's value in terms of your biomechanics being actually able to push yourself and move fast enough, but also in terms of, fitness adaptation, it's just going to make you fitter faster. And so there's going to come a point where you just need to suck it up and get into a little bit of few sessions, a little bit of up-tempo stuff, because the value is definitely going to be there.
I don't want to have to do a fucking 30 to 40K week to get a sub 20-minute 5K. I was not liking hearing that. We absolutely love doing this show. And one of the most exciting things for us is watching it grow, because it means we can commit more time to it, as well as have access to better guests to bring you even more quality content. One of the most impactful ways you can help us grow the show is by shouting it out, screenshotting this episode, and sharing it on your stories to let people know that you're listening. Don't underestimate how influential you can be on helping us grow this show, and we appreciate it so much.
I also have a theory, like zone 2 is sort of earned when it comes to the amount of availability you have. And like if you don't have that time allocation, you're better off just sticking in that middle zone. What are your thoughts around that, around the zone 2 needing a lot of time for like truly easy pace?
Yeah, I would say it would definitely play in for some people, like especially if you're, I guess especially for people who are going for their exercise before work, like if you're waking up at 7 and you've got work at 8 and you're trying to sneak a run in, you only have a specific time slot and you don't want to be losing sleep. So yeah, it makes sense. You might get an extra K or 2 if you run a slight bit faster, push yourself along. I don't think it would be a major concern if you're a uni student or, you work from home or something like that. It's probably not going to be worth really uprooting your entire training around. But I'd say that for some individuals, it'd probably be worth just pushing things along in order to get a few more Ks on feet.
I reckon it's a good time to pivot into talking about the shoe side of things, because I thought I came across you through one of your rants just about running training, or maybe whinging about marathon programs or something like that. But then something popped into my memory when we started talking about shoes. I think it actually was a shoe review that got a bit of traction or something like that. It was the first video of yours that I noticed. So can you could you talk about that? So you set out mostly just making a shoe review account, and then you started going on the odd rant about running culture and stuff like that? Or was the intention always to sort of do a mix?
I think the intention was always to do a mix, but I think there's definitely, like for me, there's definitely a hesitation to really lean hard into the controversy. Like I would say overall, like despite the fact that I'll chase after these idiots who they're taking advantage of beginner runners and all that kind of stuff, on the whole, I like to be pretty secure before I go and chuck stones. So there's only been a couple of opportunities where it's been like, this is too good to be true. There is nothing that can go wrong here. For me, that was Mega Run, which was this Gold Coast influencer run club. They were, chucking beginners into the marathon after 8 weeks, getting them to do hill sprints to adapt themselves for a marathon. The mileage progression was something like the first week they did like 7Ks. By about week 6, they progressed to about 70. It was just so clearly wrong, and it was just too good to be true. So that was like,
were they in cahoots with a physio den or something like that, or multiple physio clinics? I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bit of a bigger conspiracy at play.
Oh yeah, they're meant to be PTs. Both of them
so much money in that,
PTs.
Hundreds of tendinopathies.
Yeah, it's crazy. It was just too good to be true. And then the second one,
the program,
free bookings. And then the second one, there's been a few just chatting about the general state of running, which have done quite well. And then even just recently with the Lambros and I think it was a 12-week program, but it was pretty arse as well. I'll only really go for the controversy when I know that it's locked in, which doesn't come around often, but it pays off when it does.
Sorry, before we get into shoes, because you just jogged my memory again, one of your absolute best rants, and it's tied to what we just talked about, was you sort of criticized marathon culture, not broadly, not like the fucking Olympians and people such as yourself, but just this idea that as soon as you're getting into running these days, it's this idea that you're meant to do a marathon as soon as possible. I can totally see how it's the way to solidify yourself as a legit marathon runner, but it's like, is it if you fucking have to take a fucking 6 months off training after it, or like you run fucking 4.5 hours? Anyway, so yeah, can you just sort of speak to that? The current state of throwing yourself into a marathon.
Yeah, I don't know whether I'm sure it's always been a thing. Like the marathon has always been viewed as this kind of like bucket list thing, something that you tick off once, you never do it again. So there's always been that element, because I guess it's the peak of the sport, it's the longest event at the Olympics. It's what people see. And it's just a big distance that everyone is just, gawking over constantly. So I guess there's always been this culture that the marathon is the be all end all. But I think particularly for social media, when things come to like one-upmanship, like you start at the 5K, what's better than a 5K? 10K. What's better than a 10? Half. Oh, may as well go the full thing. So it's just like this kind of escalation where everyone's trying to be better. And then I guess it gets into ultra running, which is, I guess, where that kind of stems from as well. And I guess also with social media, there's this, I don't know whether, it probably does tie in. This just kind of quick fix mentality, the fact that you can shortcut your way to glory, or people aren't willing to stick around for a 2-year journey to watch their favorite influencer get to the marathon. People don't have the attention span for that. So 6 weeks it is. Here are my training diaries. Here's what I ate. Jumping onto the Sydney Marathon with probably 200 k's of volume all up, and it's like it's dangerous, but it's also like it makes sense in the current climate of running. It is dangerous. Like, a lot of people don't understand how much adaptation it takes to run a marathon well, to run it safely, to have a good time. And I think that it kind of robs the sport of a lot of the enjoyment that people could be getting. Like, there is a lot of fun that you can have in mastering the 5, the 10, the half, the full, coming back and doing the 5 again, doing the 10, sorting out your nutrition, getting your strength training dialed, like actually finding out your potential. Whereas I feel like, if you just jump straight to the marathon, what interest do you have in doing, a 5K to see how your leg speed is? Most people do their first marathon, they hate it, they never come back, which I just think is such a detriment to our sport. And the fact that, running influencers who are like promoting the idea that they're getting people into the sport, the fact that they're kind of, pushing this fast marathon culture, it's counterintuitive, it's counterproductive, and it just doesn't serve anyone as well as it should.
I think it's really like the pinnacle of how the mental health space and the motivation space has impacted the marathon scene more than anything, where it's just like, I feel like there's actual runners who are interested in running fast no matter what the distance is. But then there's this like motivational guy culture where it's just like, I fucking survived a 50K. And it's like, they had, it was like DNFing and shit like that. It's like, and whatever, if you're doing it because you don't want to go to therapy, I guess by all means. I think it's cool. It's like going long, but still just giving a fuck about some pace. It's like still trying to do it well. Look at us gatekeeping. I actually like it.
Big differences between like gym and running culture. Like, there is a lot of similarities in terms of like, turning up every week, small improvements, incremental changes, all that kind of stuff is very like same spot in the brain. But when it comes to the limiters, like, if you want to go and bench press 140 just because you decided you wanted to, you physically can't, like there's that limiter where you just can't do it. Whereas like anyone can pull themselves through, not anyone, most people could pull themselves through 42 Ks, even if it meant walking, whether they were ready to do it properly or not. And so there's this kind of, there's this danger around the fact that there's nothing stopping you from doing that. There's no like, no physiological warning signs which is telling you to stop immediately. Yeah, exactly. So, and you have to be paying attention to the small details to be able to pick up on it. And most people who get into running early just don't have those, they don't notice those warning signs straight away.
I know it's probably completely subjective, but do you have a recommended pathway to getting into the marathon, or is it just slowly ramping up each event? Stuff like that.
I would say, yeah, like I'm not qualified as a coach just yet. I'm probably thinking about it, but I would say it's a pretty fair thing to say that you should build up through the 5, through the 10, through the half, through the marathon. Like if you're starting cold turkey, the person who hasn't run since high school, all that kind of stuff, if you're starting cold turkey, it's going to take a year or two, or a couple of years ideally, before you actually have the leg strength or the fitness to tackle the marathon and do well. Obviously, it's going to be a bit different if you're coming from, like I did, like a lot of people do, from an intense footy background where you're probably running, 40 or 50 Ks a week cumulative with your training, with your fitness stuff, like different things for different people. But I would say it's probably good advice to say, tackle the 5K a couple of times, get it right, tackle the 10K, sort out the half marathon. Half marathon is so valuable in terms of your preparation for the marathon, even though they are two completely different events. Like, you're not pushing yourself so far into a carb deprived state. You're not spending, it's literally half as long on your feet.
We need a 3/4 marathon.
Yeah.
Dude,
they have
let's
30K
start it.
events around the place. Yeah. So it's definitely, there's a lot of learnings that you can take from the 5 and the 10 and the half all the way up to the marathon. And I think there's a lot of enjoyment that you can get as well. Like the internal motivation that you've nailed that distance, you've put in the work, you've got a PB, I just think is so important for actually motivating yourself to run a proper marathon off proper training.
Yeah. I think even just like, I was still shocked when you're like potentially even 2 to 3 years, depending on what state you're in, and if you want to do a really good job of it. Whereas like, I think, so many people's time frames, I think they would even view like a year as conservative relative to what people are recommending. So it goes to show you how much people have just always just squished it in.
Yeah.
Like I said, runfluencing or influencing has the potential to ruin anything. We got to get into a bit of shoe chat. For me, I have this awareness of the concept of super shoes. And I use cross trainers. I don't know about anything in between. So what are the different types of runners? Yeah. And then like talk about like an advanced setup, like what's the rotation look like? And then for just like a punter who's just like, oh, I have spare cash and I want to get into it. Like what are we sort of looking at developing entry-level runner, but then also, when you want something a bit more schmick?
Yeah. So I guess the kind of way that you'd step through it is like, first off, you'd have your daily trainer. So those are shoes which most people have them to walk around, walk the dog in. It's just what you're going to rack up most of your mileage in. Fairly comfortable, fairly lightweight. Yeah, Bondi 8
Have you shit on these? Or is this is this a daily trainer or?
Are they the Bondis?
I bought them because they were hockers, like because I'm a dickhead. I fully am that. It was before I followed you. I wouldn't now because now I know I'm a tosser. But but as far as so this is a daily trainer.
Yeah, so it's a daily trainer, max cushion shoe. Nowadays, all daily trainers are going to have around 40, 42 mil of foam in the heel. So there's this kind of maximalist movement going on where everything's tall and soft and compressive. And so that's the kind of standard daily trainer, just keeping you comfortable, protected for daily miles. Then you've got there's obviously variations of daily trainers. You've got like more lightweight, nimble, flexible shoes, which, keep you closer to the ground. Then you've got your max stack kind of high cushion models, a bit like a Bondi, which are really going to pamper your legs for recovery runs. Then you've got the kind of step up in pace. You've got these things called plated speed trainers. So they're shoes which often include a bit of racing technology. So they'll have like a really soft, bouncy foam on the top layer, often paired with a more durable foam on the bottom. So you get like this combination of faster running, but also durability and a bit of comfort. So you can use it for a couple of different paces. More and more, you're starting to see plates creep their way into trainers. So this one has a carbon plate, but often it'll be tuned a bit differently. So the top end super shoes, which is a carbon plated shoe, they'll often be very stiff because it's all about like leverage and propulsion and rockering you through your stride. These more daily trainers or up-tempo trainers will have a bit more flexibility to them. So they have a bit more forgiveness. They feel a bit smoother underfoot, a little bit more reliable if you want to run slower. That would probably be the next step up. And then you're kind of getting into your full-blown racing shoes, which for most people is probably going to look like the Alpha Fly 3. So these are just like
they all look like spaceships now. I feel like it happens so quick.
Literal rocket ships. Like I don't even know who comes up with these designs, but I'm here for it actually. Like, so yeah, they will often have really stiff carbon plates, like you can barely bend them with your hands.
Wow.
They're gonna have so like you could put your entire force through this,
but
and you might be able to snap it.
So it's not impeding like toe extension, I guess. Does it sort of end a little bit before the end, or is it running right through?
It's full length, so it'll actually come up underneath your big toe. So a big part of it is that it's actually like immobilizing your big toe joint, which is it's meant to. It's actually helping people in a lot of different ways. So nowadays, like that's also something that podiatrists are relying on more and more is obviously stiff shoes, but some shoes are stiff because they have a plate in them. So if they don't have big toe mobility and it's causing them discomfort, chucking them not in an Alpha Fly, but something with a bit of stiffness like a Bondi 8, that's podiatrist's favorite shoe. It can get them through. It can roll them through their stride without them having to engage their big toe or use their ankle and Achilles as much. So, those will have lightweight foams as well. They're ridiculously lightweight, propulsive. This is the top end stuff. There's been a bit of a storm of development, and there's also a lot of concerns about super shoes at the moment. Like some big debates over like injury risk.
Like the swimsuits? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I thought it was just people teasing world records as well.
Similar vein, like that discussion was probably 2 or 3 years ago. Like people saying, like, is this fair? Is this cheating? You know, like Jesse Owen ran on a like asphalt track. Usain Bolt's running. You know, like it's that kind of.
It's already gone.
It's already gone. So they're here to stay. They're fantastic. There's a lot of more anecdotal evidence because there's not a lot of studies about them, but they supposedly help with your recovery, how well you can pull up after a session. So these are much more forgiving. So in the past, people would run in shoes which were pretty much just like a wafer-thin piece of foam and rubber, which would kill your calves. Like you would do a big session and you'd be out of action for 2 or 3, 4 days afterwards. Here, you could do 20 Ks of volume. You could be pushing yourself, and the next day you still feel fresh. Like the leg freshening component of these shoes is really serious. And then the other part is economy. So we chat about like the VO2, the lactate threshold, and your economy, your efficiency. These can actually improve your efficiency. So they actually are allegedly improving your performance because they make you more efficient sometimes. So sometimes I think the upper end that they kind of measure is about 5 or 6% improvement, which if all of that was translated into your time, the speed that you're running, like, you know, because obviously it's going to change your effort level. If you were still running at a 9 out of 10 pace and your economy is improved, that could be a couple of minutes off your marathon, you know, a couple of seconds off your 5K, like serious improvements. So yeah, there's some really big components that can come from these shoes in your training, in your racing. They're pretty fantastic.
What's the minimum speed and distance you have to be hitting to not be a cunt and own some of those?
I reckon it's up in the air because, as I said, like with that, with the big toe joint thing, like there's some people who actually could benefit from you. Again, I'm not promoting the Alpha Fly as your easy jogger, but like there's some shoes, like perhaps maybe more like a carbon plated speed trainer. Some people might get more of a kick out of this for their daily training runs because, you know, helps offload the big toe joint, helps offload the calf and Achilles. But then there's also a component where these shoes are super stiff. The foams aren't going to be shaped in a way which feels good for daily training, but that's also entirely subjective. So like, you know, for me, I probably wouldn't wear a shoe like this for anything slower than maybe 4 minutes per kilometer because it just doesn't feel as good. But then for some people, you know, they could chuck this on at 6. If they say their daily training pace is 7 minutes, they could chuck this on at 6 minute pace and it would still, you know, like it'd feel a lot better. So I would say
like relative. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's all relative, but I do think that if you're using them for your easy runs, you do need to have a good hard look at yourself. Like, don't go out the door and buy this because it looks good and because, you know, you think you're going to get a bit of attention because you've got a $370 shoe on your foot. Like, buy it because you want to use it because of the properties that it has, not because of how it looks or how it's perceived. Like, yeah.
Little sidetrack. Can you go? It's probably not applicable to the audience, but can you go over some of the 1-time or 2-time use shoes and what's the science behind that? Because I'm really fascinated.
Sure. I'll actually grab one. Give you a bit of sweet. So these shoes.
How many shoes we have here? How many shoes you got?
I counted the other day. I've actually got someone going on Marketplace. We're maxing out at about 60 pairs right now.
Okay, it's very solid, obviously.
It's actually not
6-0?
6-0.
Damn. Okay.
So yeah, fair few.
Nice.
But like I work at a running store, so I get staff discount. I'm always on Marketplace, scrounging around. So there's a high turnover. But yeah, so they're calling them hyper shoes. So it's gone from super shoes to hyper shoes. These are shoes which are even lighter. So they've stripped away everything that you don't need. No, so it's actually got a similar level stack height, but it's just because the base is so much thinner because of weight saving. It kind of has that look. So most super shoes in my size would be around 220, 230 grams. These hyper shoes, the main one was the Adidas Pro Evo 1. They come in weighing about 130 grams for my size. So about 100 gram difference, which is insane. Like this feels like nothing, and you can see like the upper just like crinkles like it's a piece of paper. It's just non-existent. So and you can actually you can see the light through it, kind of stuff. So
the idea like my track spikes on a super shoe base.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, and like the foam. So oftentimes these foams will be what they call compression molded. Yeah, you can just see straight through it. That's a similar vibe here.
Fuck.
So yeah, they'll take these foams, they take a big block of foam and then they compress it down into a mold. What they do with a lot of these other shoes is instead of compressing it down, they just cut the shoe from it. And so it's lighter, more airy, everything about it. They take out the insole as well. So it's just like a mesh on the floor of the shoe. It's insane. So the concept there is that 100 grams of weight difference roughly translates to about 1% economy improvement. That's the kind of general number that gets thrown around. So if you can make a shoe which has the performance properties of something which is 100 grams more and it's, lighter, it should ideally translate to faster times. And at the moment, the women's world record for the marathon is held in one of those shoes. The marathon for the men is still held in the Alpha Fly 3. So now it's kind of this conversation around whether it's more important to have a shoe which has more guts, more bounce, more protection underfoot, or something which is just more lightweight, stripped down to the bone. So yeah, it's an interesting space, moving pretty fast. I think most brands are going to have one by the end of this year or maybe next year.
And what's the point of throwing them out? Is that is that very elite level or?
Yeah, I would say so.
Like
when Adidas came out, they made a bit of a marketing blunder and they said this shoe is optimal for one marathon only. So they said, the performance of this shoe is going to be best the first time that you use it. They said one shakeout run, chuck it on for race day, and then it'll be the best. People kind of took that as if you wear the shoe, you chuck it out straight away because they are less durable. Like the rubber is like a sticker. But I would say a lot of people are getting maybe 200, 300 Ks out of the shoe. Maybe it doesn't perform to the same level, but it's still almost non-existent on your foot. So it's still going to be better than running in, your Bondi 8.
It's fucking wild. You said that because the women's world record that got sent recently and everyone was like, she's on drugs. Was it just the shoe? Or did you have any thoughts on that? Were you aware of the controversy?
I had thoughts. Yeah. So I reckon the shoe definitely played a bit of a part. Like these performances are pretty fantastic. And
it's a dirty sport as well, right? Like people are getting done all the time.
Yeah, it is a very dirty sport. And especially Kenya as well, they have dozens and dozens of athletes on banned lists, because it's it's almost institutionalized with doctors and training camps with, suppliers and everything. Coaches are in on it. But she actually got cleared. She passed the drug test. So I take everything back. She's completely clean. We'll never hear from it again. The main thing for her was that it was such a big PB, and also her coach, Rosa Parks, I'm pretty sure it was, had another 3 or 4 athletes underneath them who were also caught doping. So it's if you're doping with a couple of your athletes, why would you just suddenly be the best one here, completely clean? But I think you've got to trust the blood tests. Otherwise, what is this sport even? So for now, I'm congratulating her. It's still a fantastic performance, and if it comes out in a couple of years, I won't be surprised. But for now, you just got to congratulate such a huge performance.
are you anticipating a sub 2 from the men? Or because like when Kelvin Kiptum before his tragic passing, like I was like, we are getting it. But
yeah, I thought it would be this year. So like, yeah, he was well on track. Like any idiot could see that. You know, he was well on his way. I don't think it will happen for another 2 or 3 years, but there is, you know, there's kind of rumblings around the fact that there's people in Kenya, in Ethiopia, who are in and around that level. I think the problem with the marathon is that there's so many things have to go right. You know, like you need to have your best day. The fuel needs to go down well, wind, temperature, pacing, you know, like one second per kilometer off, and you could jeopardize, you know, another 3 or 4 seconds down the line. So I feel like it'll happen. And I feel like there's probably, you know, there could well be 5 or 6 people who could run sub 2. It's just like whether they're going to be in the right place at the right time, eating the right thing, having done the right training for their physiology, all this other stuff that plays into it. But I reckon it could happen in the next 2 or 3 years.
Fuck. I didn't want to have to wait that long, but I guess we're sort of, it's a good world record. Oh, sorry, it's not just the world record. There's going to be so many world records on the way to this eventual sub 2, but it's such a tasty milestone.
Oh, absolutely. I just want someone to chomp it off all at once. I think it's, 39 seconds now? Like, it would just be unreal if that went all at once. So, 2 hours and, men's world record marathon. I think it's sitting at, 2 hours and 35 seconds. So, you know,
maybe someone could do that.
Someone could do that. But the problem is that no one else was Kiptum. So, you know, the top like 5 or 6 times are all Kipchoge and Kiptum. So there's no one who's like right there. Okay. You know,
No, that makes sense. Yeah. All right. Well, fucking, I think Jacob's done well to keep things not from exploding in the background as on a bit of a boys trip at the moment. And this has been a fucking phenomenal chat. But it is also past my bedtime, sadly. I was desperate to get a good guest on this week. So thanks so much, Crago, for coming on. Sorry, Jack. Well, you don't care either way, Crago, Jack. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Jack. Great chats.
But yeah, so shout out your socials because you're also going on a bit of a YouTube arc, aren't you? I love that. We love the long form content here.
Love it as well. It's been best change that I've made in the last 6 months, I reckon. So yeah, socials, Instagram and YouTube are both Jog on Crago. But yeah, you'll probably find me if you search up Jack Crago or Crago, Crago. You'll probably find that as well. So yeah, I'm there on YouTube. Just getting into the last section of my training for Osaka. And yeah, fair bit of shoe review stuff. So like if you're an absolute numpty, you don't know what you're talking about in terms of shoes, there's probably a video on there which could help you out.
Yeah, I hope you vlog a lot of the Osaka trip and everything as well. That'll be sick.
Oh, absolutely.
I know it's a lot of work having to film everything, but yeah, just selfishly.
I'm absolutely going to be snapping that up.
Hell yeah. All right, well, everyone, check him out on Instagram and keep up with the journey into Osaka, and we'll catch you next week.